that we were left here as family members of God's body in His church. We were left here to fulfill His dream, His desire, His kingdom purpose on His earth.
James Robison became one of the most influential voices in American evangelicalism, reaching millions through bold preaching, public influence, and humanitarian work. But his story was never simple. Behind the powerful sermons were struggles, controversy, and a difficult childhood that shaped the man he became. Over time, his mission shifted from fiery public battles to compassion in action, feeding the hungry and helping provide clean water to communities in need. His life raises a powerful question. How can faith, failure, conviction, and grace exist in one legacy? James Robison's journey offers inspiration, complexity, and lasting impact. The sudden passing of James Robison. On Sunday, May 17, 2026, Life Outreach International stunned the Christian community with the announcement of Reverend James Robison's death. At 82 years old, Robison had been an enduring voice in evangelical circles for over 6 decades. The ministry's board shared a heartfelt statement that not only confirmed his passing, but also underscored the legacy he and his wife, Betty, had built together. They described a life spent sharing the gospel and extending hope, healing, and practical help to those in need around the world. The statement also reassured supporters that the ministry's mission would continue, feeding the hungry, providing clean water, and spreading the message of Christ. They closed with a poignant passage from Matthew 25, highlighting Robison as a good and faithful servant. At the time of the announcement, no official cause of death was disclosed, which left many followers and observers searching for more answers. The news sent ripples through a global audience that had grown familiar with Robison's voice and vision. Robison's sudden passing came at a moment when a lot of people still saw him as an active spiritual leader. He had preached well into his 80s, so the news felt jarring, almost like it happened a little too fast. His longevity in ministry, together with the profound impact of Life Outreach International, made it seem like a final closing of a pretty significant chapter in evangelical history. Prayers, and condolences poured in for his wife Betty, for his family, and for everyone who had been touched by the ministry's reach. The weight of Robison's departure was felt both personally and in a more institutional way too. But behind the announcement, there was this deeper story, one of resilience that was forged through hardship, full of public victories and those quieter, private struggles. That's what made James Robison's life more than just the sum of the headlines. The initial shock of his death kind of opened a door, and suddenly people wanted to know the fuller picture. The man who had shaped so many lives, in ways that were visible and also unseen. Robison's story wasn't only about ministry success, it was about moving through layers of personal pain while also facing public scrutiny. His early beginnings and the long road he walked became even more meaningful in light of his final farewell. And then, the real question kept echoing. How did someone born into such difficult circumstances rise to become a leading figure in American Christianity? The Christian world reflected on Robison's journey, his genuine faith, his leadership, the legacy he left behind. In a sense, his death was both an ending and a moment to look deeper at the forces that shaped his life and ministry. People who knew him spoke of his sincerity and the way he influenced others. Those who were less familiar, however, were left prompted to explore a life that was rich in contradiction and grace, even if it didn't always fit neatly into one storyline. This announcement was the starting point of a story that would uncover the many facets of James Robison's extraordinary existence. To understand why his passing broke hearts and inspired reflection, we need to look at how his story began. A childhood marked by fire. James Robison's life began under difficult and uncertain circumstances on October 9, 1943. in the charity ward of a Pasadena, Texas hospital. His mother, Myra Wattinger, was a nurse, and his birth was the result of a forced, indecent encounter, a painful reality she openly shared during his lifetime. Attempting to find a safe home for her son, she placed an advertisement seeking a family to care for him, answered by Reverend H.D. Hale and his wife. For several early years, Robison was raised in that household, a family shaped by faith rather than biology. When James was about 5, his mother reclaimed him and married the man who had assaulted her. His biological father was an alcoholic, and according to Robison, their relationship was marked by instability, fear, and violence. A profound moment came during James's teenage years when he nearly shot his father in self-defense. Following that, the elder was arrested, and James was sent back to the Hales. It was there, at a revival meeting, that Robison experienced what he described as a life-changing encounter with Jesus at age 14. Amid this upheaval, Robison also met Betty Freeman in the church community pastored by Reverend Hale. They would marry on February 23, 1963, at the age of 19, and remain together for more than 60 years. Betty was much more than a life partner. She was the steadfast companion in both the joys and trials of ministry, a foundation for everything James would build. Together, their bond endured scandals, shifting theology, political battles, and profound personal grief. God's call to ministry came to Robison when he was 18, and from that point, doors just started opening. Like, somehow, not always, but enough that it felt real. His early preaching engagements grew rather fast, and then it turned into stadium crusades across the nation, drawing millions over decades. Official records show over 20 million attended his campaigns, and that led to more than 2 million documented decisions for Christ. I mean, those numbers testify to a ministry that cast a wide influence and touched countless lives, way beyond the usual reach that many evangelists ever seem to get. Robison's early years in ministry showed a firebrand kind of style, the sort with bold confrontation in the messages, often turning toward the pressing social questions of the time. His public image was shaped in part by how ready he was to stir controversy and to take on cultural shifts head-on. That method sometimes brought him supporters and also critics, and in a way, it set the pace for a ministry that stayed right in the middle of ongoing cultural arguments of the era. The trouble of his childhood and youth sat in sharp contrast to the success he found as a young evangelist, and that tension kind of kept showing up again and again throughout his life. His own story of pain, faith, and redemption became a background story that fed into both his preaching and his personal calling. You could say the roots of his sturdiness and his commitment were tied to those early formative experiences, even if people didn't see all of it. But stepping beyond the personal side, Robison's arrival into the public eye lined up with a shaky, volatile period in America's social and cultural history. It was into that climate that he carried a message of conviction, and also a voice willing to engage the culture wars, not just whisper around them, but walk into it. The foundation laid by his early life challenges set the stage for the next phase of his ministry: rise as a firebrand evangelist. By the 1970s, James Robison had become one of the most recognizable firebrand evangelists in America. His preaching was passionate, direct, and often confrontational, drawing massive crowds through citywide crusades and reaching millions more through television. He did not avoid controversial issues. Instead, he leaned into them, speaking with a boldness that made him both admired and criticized. His style helped set him apart in a changing religious and cultural landscape. Robison's sermons often addressed morality, politics, and national identity, placing him at the center of debates that were shaping evangelical America. To supporters, he was a fearless voice defending biblical truth. To critics, He was a divisive figure stirring conflict in an already tense society. One of the biggest controversies came in 1979, when comments he made about homosexuality on his Dallas television program sparked backlash from a gay rights group. The group demanded equal airtime under the Fairness Doctrine, and the station responded by canceling Robison's broadcast. His supporters reacted strongly, and the public pressure eventually led to the show being restored. The incident revealed just how powerful and polarizing his voice had become. Robison's influence reached a major turning point in August 1980 during the National Affairs briefing at Reunion Arena in Dallas. Sharing the stage with presidential candidate Ronald Reagan, Robison delivered a fiery call for Christians to step into public life. His message that it was time for God's people to come out of the closet energized many evangelicals who believed their values needed a stronger voice in government and culture. That moment became closely tied to the rise of conservative Christian political activism. Mike Huckabee, who worked as Robison's communications director in the 1970s, later credited James and Betty Robison as major influences on his life and leadership. The Dallas rally became part of a larger movement that helped mobilize evangelical voters and shape American politics. But the same influence that brought Robison national attention also created personal strain. By the mid-1980s, he began to recognize that fame, ambition, and constant public conflict had changed him. He later admitted that he had become someone he no longer recognized or liked. That realization marked a turning point. Robison stepped back from the political spotlight, sought forgiveness, and began broadening his spiritual outlook. Over time, his ministry shifted from confrontation to compassion, focusing more on humanitarian work and practical help for the suffering. This transformation became one of the most important arcs of his life. The fire of his early years set the backdrop for the humanitarian mission that would come to define his later decades: political influence and national impact. James Robison's rise as a bold preacher eventually brought him into the center of American religion and politics. By the late 1970s and early 1980s, he had become one of the major evangelical voices speaking into national issues. His preaching reached millions, but what made him stand out was his willingness to confront cultural and political debates directly. One of the most important moments came in August 1980 at Reunion Arena in Dallas during the National Affairs briefing. The event gathered major evangelical leaders and became a turning point in the political awakening of conservative Christians. Robison stood alongside presidential candidate Ronald Reagan and delivered a message that stirred the crowd. He urged believers to come out of the closet and take their place in society and government. That message captured the energy of a movement that was already growing across America. Many evangelicals believed their values were being pushed out of public life, and Robison's words helped give that frustration a national voice. The rally became closely tied to the rise of faith-based political activism and the broader evangelical resurgence that shaped American politics in the late 20th century. Robison's influence kind of spread into future political leaders as well, not just the church world. Mike Huckabee, who served as his communications director in the 1970s, later said James and Betty Robison were major influences on his life. And it was more than just preaching. Honestly, they shaped people who would go on to step into leadership, politics, and ministry later. Still, Robison's political pull wasn't all clean lines and easy wins. As his name got bigger, he felt himself drawn deeper into public fights, non-stop media attention, and the hard requirements that come with power. The whole blend of faith, politics, and personal ambition started touching him in ways he later admitted were dangerous, even if at the time it didn't feel that way. By the mid-1980s, he began distancing himself from that political identity. He flat out acknowledged that fame plus the drive to have influence had changed him into someone he no longer wanted to be. That kind of confession, it became a turning point, like for real. Rather than staying in the center of that political confrontation, Robison moved toward personal renewal and, in a quieter sense, a wider spiritual outlook. He and Betty got more closely connected with charismatic and renewal-focused communities, and eventually, they found a different kind of ministry through Life Today. That shift didn't erase the political impact, but it did redirect the course of his legacy. James Robison moved away from public battles toward practical compassion, and he reworked his ministry around faith, service, and the gospel lived out through action. Even as Robison stepped away from the political spotlight, the echoes of his influence lingered, a reminder that faith and politics had been irrevocably intertwined in his story. Personal struggles and spiritual pivot. James Robison's public image was built on bold preaching, fiery conviction, and national influence. But behind that public life was a private journey marked by struggle, reflection, and spiritual change. At the height of his career, Robison began to recognize that the pressure, attention, and desire for admiration had affected him deeply. He later admitted that he had become someone he barely recognized, and his wife Betty had seen the change even earlier. This realization pushed him into a season of repentance and personal realignment. It was not a simple change in style, but a deeper shift in identity and purpose. Robison sought forgiveness, stepped back from the intensity of political battles, and began broadening his spiritual outlook. He and Betty became more connected to faith communities focused on renewal, healing, worship, and the work of the Holy Spirit. Their involvement with Gateway Church reflected part of this transition, placing them in a ministry environment centered less on political confrontation and more on spiritual restoration. Still, that chapter later became more complicated as scandals surrounding the church added another layer of complexity to their story. Like much of Robison's life, it was never entirely simple. A major turning point came through Life Today, the daily television program James and Betty co-hosted. The show gave them a new platform, featuring testimonies, public figures, ordinary people, and humanitarian stories from around the world. It opened the door for a different kind of ministry, one focused not just on preaching, but on listening, compassion, and practical help. That mission got clearer during a trip to South Africa, where the Robisons came across missionaries working right alongside poverty, hunger, and disease. What they saw really shifted things. He stopped leaning so much on public influence and started pushing tangible acts of mercy more directly. Out of that whole vision came Life Outreach International, which became the main work of his later years, or at least the thing he kept returning to. With Life Outreach, more than 9,500 water wells have been provided, so clean water reaches over 9.5 million people. And the feeding programs, they nourish more than 350,000 children each day. Plus, there are disaster relief efforts, anti-trafficking work, and shoe distribution too. Robison also came to believe the gospel could not just be stated, it had to be shown through action. Clean water, food, safety, and compassion weren't separate from faith. It was how faith looks when it's lived. The complexities of his journey teach us that faith and leadership often involve pain, growth, and transformation, elements that made Robison's final chapters among the most meaningful of his remarkable life. Humanitarian legacy and ongoing ministry. James Robison's later years showed a major shift in his life and ministry. After years of public preaching and political involvement, his focus turned more deeply toward humanitarian outreach. Through Life Outreach International, the ministry he founded with his wife Betty, Robison helped lead efforts that brought clean water, food, and practical support to vulnerable communities around the world. This work became one of the most defining parts of his legacy. Life Outreach International has helped drill more than 9,500 water wells, giving clean water to over 9.5 million people. Its feeding programs also provide daily nutrition to more than 350,000 children across Africa, helping fight hunger, malnutrition, and preventable suffering. But the ministry did not just stop at water and food. It sort of kept expanding, into disaster relief, anti-trafficking efforts, and even programs that gave children shoes in hard, difficult living conditions. For Robison, compassion was not something separate from faith. He thought the gospel had to be lived out through action, especially when folks were dealing with hunger, thirst, danger, or just loss. His TV program, Life Today, co-hosted with Betty, kind of became this big platform for sharing these needs with a global audience. With strong stories from villages, crisis zones, and families that were really struggling, viewers were invited to join the mission and to not stay on the sidelines. In 2015, Robison also started The Stream, an online platform with Christian commentary about faith, culture, and public life. Meanwhile, the Robison family also went through serious personal grief when their daughter Robin died in 2012 after a long battle with throat cancer. Her faith left a lasting mark on the ministry and on the message. Even though James Robison's life had controversy, struggle, and a lot of complexity, the last decades showed a legacy of compassion. His work kept on feeding children, providing clean water, and showing faith through service again and again. James Robison's life was a journey of faith, struggle, and profound impact, from bold evangelism to compassionate humanitarian work. His legacy challenges us to embrace both truth and grace, recognizing the power of a life spent serving others. If this story moved you, please like and subscribe for more honest and meaningful stories from the Christian world. And before you go, click the next video on your screen to discover another powerful story of faith, legacy, and the lives that continue to shape Christian history.